Our work has always been, at least we've tried to be transparent around how we've structured it. And there's layers to our process. And just like any other philanthropic group, there are layers to the process. In our case, our layers also include the National Urban League, and ultimately they are making a recommendation of funding to the Lilly Endowment as far as what their plan is.
Welcome to the IAAQLI 6 Pillars in Action podcast, where we deep dive into the transformative impact of the work being done in Indianapolis Black communities. Get ready to be inspired by the incredible projects and organizations making a real difference in the lives of Indianapolis residents. And that conversation starts right now.
Welcome back to 6 Pillars in Action podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Douglas. And on this podcast, we take an in-depth look at the incredible work of the IAAQLI, or the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. If you missed our last episode, you definitely want to check it out because we gave incredible details about the final round of this initiative. And today we are back with President of the Urban League, Tony Mason, to talk more about that final round and what we can expect moving forward. So welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
So as you think about this final round, what do you really hope to see?
Well, with this final round, one of the things that's important for the community to know is we're 5 years into this work, $60 million awarded in grants to over 100 community organizations. And so we're starting to see the fruits of some of those investments. We're starting to see housing units pop up across town. We know that we have educators who have earned credentials and certifications. We know that we're making strides in impacting health disparities in the community. And we know that we have created pathways for individuals seeking employment, as well as also for businesses and entrepreneurs to further stabilize their businesses. But, in this round, of course, we're going to be seeking opportunities for more of our grantees to collaborate. And so a good example would be, how do we create efficient and cost-effective housing for families, multifamily housing units. And so you're going to see partnerships in that space. You're going to see us have school districts work together to address issues in the learning environment in their schools. So we want to make sure that our children have the opportunity to get the resources and the instruction and skills necessary to ensure that they succeed in the classroom. We also are going to see investments in civic engagement and leadership, because we recognize that, again, we have to continue to make investments in organizations and individuals to ensure that this nonprofit safety net, if you will, is really strong. We consider the legislative efforts that are underway both at the federal and state level. We now know that the nonprofit community is going to be called on to step in and to fill the gaps.
Yes.
Because there are going to be some, and there's no escaping that. And so how do we make sure that our leaders are ready, that our organizations are ready, that they are also competitive for funding for additional sources? Because that's going to be an important part of this work too. As you've shared, we're approaching the last round with the Quality of Life Initiative. And so our organization and those leaders need to be prepared to pursue funding from, other entities, the United Way, the Central Indiana Community Foundation, Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. I can name that list and we can go on and on.
Yeah.
But they have to be ready in order to do that, because this is ongoing work, and it's going to be decades in the making. But we're excited for the opportunities that we see happening. There's no part of town now that you can go to where you don't see some impact of the initiative.
Yeah, I'm grateful you mentioned that too, about legislation playing a role in this space. I don't think people really understand how much of a role legislation can play until we've seen all these executive orders come down and how it impacts our communities. We had a community organization in our neighborhood that would have lost $300,000 from a single initiative. And I don't think people understand that real life, real time impact on their lives. So I'm grateful that you mentioned that. Also, I wanted to ask now, big dreaming.
Yes.
What would you like to see long term? Big dreaming. What do you think the legacy of the IAAQLI opportunity will be on our people and on our communities?
The legacy, the long-term legacy would be is that we empowered people. So really, when we think about the Urban League, you think about our tagline, empowering communities and changing lives, that we will have lifted our people, that we will have them educated, trained, that they go into jobs where they're earning good wages, they have benefits, they can afford quality, safe housing, that the children will be attending, whether it's early learning, childcare, or schools that are thriving and that prepare them for opportunities that will come in the future. That we come alongside businesses and entrepreneurs to make sure that they're successful, because as we're learning in our community, we need to be making sure that our dollars are circulating more in our neighborhoods and in our communities, because those are going to be the businesses that are standing with us and beside us during good times and bad times. We also want to make sure that, from a housing standpoint, because this is such a critical issue, if you don't have safe, affordable, quality housing, then the family unit is totally unstable.
Yes.
And so that we create those housing opportunities with an onus on affordability, and so that families can, again, also build multi-generational wealth along the way. And so, again, this is catalytic in nature, and so it's also going to be incumbent upon us over time to find additional resources and or partners who will carry on and sustain this work.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your work and for being here today. When we come back, we will be back again with Carlin and Willis to talk about their hopes and what they have for the future of IAAQLI in our communities.
Coming up next on the Six Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
Welcome back to Six Pillars in Action podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Douglas, and here we have Carlin and Willis back with us to talk about the final round and to get into more of like future, what you guys see in the future. So first up, I know last time we started to talk about the final round, what people can expect, your three-pronged process, right? And the second prong of that is an open period. Right. So what can people expect? How will those be reviewed? What should people be expecting?
Yeah, our work has always been, at least we've tried to be transparent around how we've structured it. And there's layers to our process. And just like any other philanthropic group, there are layers to the process. In our case, our layers also include the National Urban League, and ultimately they are making a recommendation of funding to the Lilly Endowment as far as what their plan is. With that in mind, we still do a lot of back work to get to the point where they can be clear about what those investments are. And so the way we structure it is we put out an RFP, and in the case of the open opportunity, the same will be true. We'll give a window of time for grantees or potential grantees to apply, and then we will spend probably another 6 weeks going through our internal process, which includes at least an odd number of consultants, blind consultants, reviewing each proposal, giving us a recommendation, and giving us reviews, deep reviews of each application to the extent that they can tell us whether or not this is a quality application and whether or not it's a risk to IAAQLI. From there, our internal team reviews the feedback from the consultants. That's why it takes so long. And then we submit a recommendation to the National Urban League, ultimately, who makes the final decision. And so it's a period. It's a period, and it's a process, and it's a negotiation between our consultants, us, and the National Urban League. And we do scrutinize each and every application because we need to be able to articulate whether or not these projects are legitimately designed, whether or not they can also get to the outcomes that they were previously outlined to do as it relates to our request for proposals.
The contract for the grant comes from the National Urban League and will be negotiated between the National Urban League and the organization receiving the grant. And there are certain protocols that have to be achieved related to that grant agreement, the timeline of the grant period, when payments will be made, what kind of reports are due, etc. So there's quite a lot involved in the overall process, even when people have been confirmed that they have received a grant. That's when the work really begins, because then they have to do it, and then they have to report on what they've been done, so that we have the database that says this organization received a grant to aid children to get ready to go to school. They have done this with this many children, and here's how they've done it, et cetera, ad nauseum. So it's a process that requires some precision on the part of everyone. But clearly, the IAAQLI team here in Indianapolis is not the final decision point. We only make recommendations to the National Urban League, and then they forward any of their recommendations on. Ultimately, they make the decision, but they also may even consult with Lilly Endowment, who is the grantor to them.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you guys giving that information, because I think folks that may not be familiar with the process or haven't been through the process may not know these things. And kind of keeping in line with that, I wanted to go back over like the 6 pillars and how you got there quickly. We don't have to, we've done it in a previous episode. So if you haven't gone to see it, go do it. But here, I just want to give a brief overview for those who will be new to this open round that you all have, or the open prong that you guys have. Can you talk about that? Talk about the 6 pillars.
Yeah, so the 6 pillars are associated not directly with the social determinants of health, but they're informed by the social determinants of health. And so we have business and entrepreneurship, employment, education, health and wellness. We also have home ownership and housing, and we have leadership and civic engagement. We understand that each of those categories of focus align to the social determinants of health, that if we invest in them, they create positive outcomes for those who are targeted. And in our case, Black African Americans in Indianapolis, Marion County.
Nice. I appreciate that. So with this final round, I know we said that you're really lasering in, especially with the invitationals, on individuals that you've worked with previously and stuff. Is there any particular initiatives or even ideas or innovation you guys are really looking forward to doing, like with this final round?
Yeah, it's a great question. So not every invitational is an organization we've previously worked with. It may be an organization that aligns really well to a targeted strategy we have. And so what we are really hoping to see from is collaboration. And I believe Tony shared that in the previous iteration of this podcast. Collaboration is really important, that we want to lift up. We've always wanted to, but we're more and more intentional about that, because we understand this is truly an ecosystem. Yeah. And if we want to address long-term issues, we have to do it collaboratively with one mind and one focus. And so collaboration is really key for us. We also really want shovel-ready projects that really align well to our primary strategies. And we want those projects to also have a sustainable impact ability, so that beyond the next 2 years, which I should say all grants will be for 2 years and no more than, but beyond the 2 years, they can still look back and say, this is a collective mechanism for additional funds to continue to make the impact that this story is allowing us to tell. And so every project will need to be able to do that. You are more advantageous if you have a collaboration, but for the invitationals, we are trying very hard to ensure that most of them, if not all of them, have some form of collaboration, because that ecosystem needs to work hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think is being said, we may be giving a grant to a particular entity, but they may be working with 5 or 6 other either organizations, or they may be working with other teams that'll be actually carrying out the particular program activity. So I think that what we are hoping is that we will be able to address issues in a very wide, broad, but deep way, and working through collaborative, coordinated efforts to be able to do that.
I know before last time you all were here, you talked about outcomes and outcomes being really important. Does that include, so like for smaller organizations that are like, well, listen, I only reach, this many people, 50 people, or I only reach, and you have bigger organizations that are reaching thousands of folks. Does that play a role in this when you talk about outcomes? Is it about quality, quantity? Is it about like what they can sustain? Like what really plays into those outcomes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one has to clarify what's the difference between the output and the outcome. And the philanthropic space has this conversation all the time. Outputs are really those numerical values that you can count, how many people were served, for example. But the change we really want to see is the amount of people who have access to quality food, for example. That's the change we want to see in a sustained way. And so if we're only just serving people, but there's no outcome as a result of it, then we just spent a lot of money to serve people for a period of time, but nothing changed. So we want to see the change. And so the smaller organizations can still contribute to the change. They just might do it in a smaller way within that larger ecosystem. And so if I'm a small organization, articulate the extent to which I can support that ecosystem change, even if it's just within my local community in this small part of zip code in this one neighborhood.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Sometimes a small organization has a very close relationship with a group of people that they're working with. And because of that relationship, plus their use of either technology or use of the other techniques that they may be learning, they may have a better chance of having a deeper penetration and deeper behavioral or attitudinal change than sometimes large systems that are doing things more broadly. So each can have an outcome, and it just depends on the relationship that the vendor, the entity that's carrying out the program has, and that the measures that they are looking at are appropriate to the grant program that they are trying to execute.
So in keeping in line with like potentially organizations that could be new to this process, what kind of things are baked in for them? What kind of supports are baked into this process? Because I can imagine even now, especially with this being the final round, it's even more crucial to make sure that they can really sustain this work and have the supports needed. So what kind of things are baked into this for them?
Yeah, so our goal, historically, we've always had a technical assistance day or half a day. And for the open round, our plan is to do the same. First and foremost, you'll be able to review the RFP, and our intent is for it to be as clear as possible. At the point at which you review the RFP, you'll have an opportunity to put together a conceptual idea, come to our technical assistance day, but then also spend time with a consultant in one of the pillars to share your idea with them and get feedback. We've seen people engage at a high level in that opportunity. We've also seen people not. And what I could say is that you're actually more advantageous to engage because it produces the opportunity for your proposal to be stronger. Yeah. There's no guarantee for funding, but your proposal will be stronger if you come to consultation. Yeah. So take advantage of that opportunity. And then you'll have a window of time to take the feedback and then go apply it to your application so that it's better. And so people need to spend time getting their ideas together. What am I seeing that needs to happen? Regardless of the size of my organization, can I articulate a potential plan that has outcomes? All right. But then I think a couple of questions need to be answered. Do I have the infrastructure to manage this grant myself? If I do not, who do I need to partner with as a potential fiduciary to help me apply for this fund? Right. If I can manage this grant myself, do I have the mechanism to report on the outcomes? And if I can say, yes, I have the infrastructure and I can report on the outcomes, then you're probably well prepared to apply for these funds. And if your answer is no to any of those questions, then you're not as prepared as you need to be, and you might need to do a little bit of work before you propose the idea to build the infrastructure and the capacity.
Yeah, to that point, it's much better to say that we can work with 15 people very well and have these particular outcomes, or put in your proposal that you're going to serve 80 people. The people who will be reviewing the proposals, they're experts in that particular area. They're going to see that the resources you have, the objectives that you're trying to carry out, that there is no way possible that you could do 80 people and have outcomes, where with 10 or 15 or 20, again, it depends on the capacity of the organization. So there has to be reality in not just what you wish or dream. It has to be concrete.
And I want to give a specific example of how some reviewers might even look at it. If you give a proposal that's $300,000 and the amount of people you're serving is 15, then they're going to divide that 3,000 and that 15, and they're 300,000 and that 15. They're going to say the price per person to be served is expensive.
Yeah.
Could we get that same project done for less expensive? And the answer generally will be yeah. Right? So be also mindful of how much you ask for in relation to how many people you serve.
This is so valuable. It almost, when you were speaking, it made me want to like have like a process, like, are you ready for funding? And having people like answer these questions just to get their mind thinking about these things, because I think that's so helpful. Like, maybe I'm not ready.
Well, that's the reason we have had sessions where we provide people who walk people through what a proposal development would be. We've had a panel of funders that talk about how their particular funding entity reviews and looks at proposals. So we've tried to provide people as much technical assistance as well as our time right before submission, sitting down with people saying, okay, here's how I'm looking at your RFP. Here's what I'm thinking about. We've kind of looked at it this way. We aren't going to write it for them, but we may suggest that you think about this, that, and the other, so that people have the best chance. But remember, it's a competitive process. And just because you've had a proposal that is a good one, it may not be quite as good as another one for the same cost. And with limited amount of resources, we have to make judgments. Yeah. So that's the reason I often have said it's not easy giving good money away to good projects, because you have to make judgments, and sometimes you have to make judgments against folks that have done good planning, but it just is not, there are not sufficient resources to cover everything.
Yeah. So make sure you come back with us. We will be back with Willis and Carlin talking about like their vision for the future of this process, and also just even more things about how they're supported, folks are supported through this process as well.
Coming up next on the 6 Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
Welcome back to 6 Pillars in Action podcast. We are still here with Willis and Carlin talking about the final round and their big vision for what comes next. So last segment, even last episode you guys were here, we talked a lot about sustainability because this is, to your point, the final round, right? So as we're approaching that, in organizations, obviously they've started amazing things with this funding, but need to be able to continue this great work. Have you guys, I know we talked about you guys all talking and communicating with other funders in philanthropy and whatnot, but have you intentionally like handed off folks in that way? Like projects that are just really great that deserve to continue to be invested in, or especially ones that maybe haven't had, this was their first, experience with big funding, right? So what does that look like? Have you guys had those conversations, those kind of specific handoffs?
Yeah. So to some degree, specific handoffs. You would imagine if we're in the first round of funding, many of the projects have ended or are ending.
Yeah.
So that's an opportunity for us to engage in those conversations to make those handoffs. Round 2 and 3 are technically still happening. So during our evaluation time, after this last round of funding is done, that's when we'll really start evaluating the extent to which we can make recommendations for handoffs at the individualized organizational level. But what we've been doing is really trying to hand off the broader work. And so that's part of why we're approaching the invitational round so intentionally. How can we leverage our seat at the table now to help and ask other organizations, philanthropic or otherwise, to take over the work that then subsequently benefits these organizations? And that's part of why we're focusing it this way, because if we limit it to just funding organizations but we don't fund the ecosystem, then the organizations will run out of access to dollars.
Yeah,
we
I
want
love
to
that.
fund the ecosystem.
Love that.
And we also look for other funding. That is, when the organization applies to us, do they get funding from other sources? We are rarely not the only funder for a particular proposal. And I think that that's important, that people have multiple entities, whether they be individuals or corporate or churches or whomever, that are also seeing the work that they're doing as valuable and are making contribution. If we are the only one that sees value in a particular piece of work and are the only one that would fund it, we might hesitate to do so because that would leave an organization in a situation where I suggested in a previous broadcast that they get people's hopes up, they get started on the work, then there's no ability to have continuity, and it crashes and burns again, and disillusionment and incomplete work. So long and short of the matter is, we always hope that there are other funders that we are joining in supporting an organization, or, as was being suggested, our support might leverage people to be able to go to other funding entities to get support.
So we've talked a lot about the process and what happens if they get funding and the resources that are baked in. And if you haven't heard it, make sure you go and listen to the other episodes so you can hear all of those things. But what happens when they don't get funding? So are those people who don't get approved for this funding, are they being communicated with so that they know like where they could have done better, maybe places they can improve their plan or their process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll give you a little context. The first round, we had upwards of 100 organizations apply for over 80 million in the first round. There's no real way for us, with the limited capacity we have intentionally, to give every single organization direct feedback. So what we've done is given affirmative feedback. What that really looks like is this: what have successful organizations or applications looked like? And that is included in the declination letters. Declination letter is the letter that says you were declined for this opportunity. And so generally they get 5 statements of, if these things were true in the future, essentially, you had a better opportunity. Instead of saying these things weren't true, these are things that would be beneficial if they were true. And so that's the best way that we could do it with our limited capacity. So we do feel like organizations have received feedback. And in the instances where organizations have reached out to ask for specific feedback, to the extent that we could, we have given ourselves space to give that feedback as well.
Oh, that's amazing. So they've reached out. That's amazing too. Yeah. Okay. So before we leave here, obviously we have the last round coming up. Second quarter is what we're giving folks. Second quarter. So with that, how can they stay up to date, get this information? Where can they go? What can they do so that they know about everything that's happening?
Ask every Black person in the community who knows about IAAQLI, when does the money come? No, I'm kidding.
Right.
Really, the answer is to go to our website, IAAQLI.org. If you go there, you sign up to be on the listserv, you'll receive the updates as they come out. That's the fastest way to know. The second way is to check the website on a weekly basis. Now, if you're not that kind of human, then get on the listserv. But we will communicate by the second quarter of this year. That is our goal. Try to hold us to it, but we try to hold ourselves accountable to it as well. But the reality is the reality. Things are not easy to do all the time. So that is our goal. Check the website.
So before we go, really quick, because I know we're close, really quick, I want to hear about you all's big vision. I asked Tony about his big vision. How does he see this funding, this initiative impacting folks long term? And obviously, even with 5 years, you can't really see all of the impact that this money or this opportunity has created for folks. But would love to hear you all's big vision for what this is going to do long term.
Yeah, I'll go first because I think he should round us off. I'll say very simply, empowerment and collective impact. is the goal, that through this work, outcomes could be demonstrated and that collective impact can be demonstrated so that there's continued investment in this intentional space. And in this current context and climate, it's more and more true and necessary.
I'll simply add, I hope we have been able to enable some challenges to be addressed, some problems solved, some new ways of doing business defined, and that people will be able to take their way of doing community work to another funding entity to get support to continue what they're doing, or that the issue will have been resolved and everyone being affected is free to go on their own without any more support.
Beach time.
It's so fun. I heard a young person one time in the nonprofit space say, like, well, then you're going to work yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's the goal. I'll find a new problem to solve.
That's right.
Right? Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here, for sharing with us, for sharing about the process. Thank you all so much for being here, for watching. Make sure that you catch up on any past episodes too, just in case you missed some information coming up on this final round, quarter 2. You need to go to IAAQLI.org to make sure you're on their listserv so that you can make sure you get that information. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube at IAAQLI. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the 6 Pillars in Action podcast, where we shine the light on the work transforming the lives of African American residents across Indianapolis. We're excited to announce that the 4th and final round of funding from the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative is launching soon, with $29 million in new investments available for community-driven change. Mark your calendars and join us live on Facebook and YouTube on Monday, July 7th at 2:30 p.m. to get all of the key details about eligibility, the application process, and what's next for this historic initiative. And stay tuned for the upcoming IAAQLI documentary, celebrating the people, the partnerships, and the powerful impact behind this bold investment in our communities. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on July 7th.